She had done it. Jenny stood triumphant at the top of the stairs, with an equal sense of shock and relief. "Well," she sighed, "until death do us part, darling." She had never wanted it to end this way, but she had reached her breaking point. All it took was a push, and she had sent her husband tumbling down the wine cellar steps to his death. Jenny Whalen was the picturesque trophy wife any man could have asked for by his side. She was a tall, attractive 20-something brunette with a sense of fashion and an appetite for expensive things. Jenny's now deceased husband, Edward Whalen, fell in love with all of her traits, especially her youth, the moment he saw her. After all, he was 40 years her senior when they met. Edward was born into money, having come from a family of wealth and fortune known for being tight-fisted with their assets. Over the years, much like his family, he had become extremely frugal with that wealth, to the point of hoarding most of his fortune. He refused to spend extra on anything lavish or extravagant, even denying the basic upkeep of the Whalen estate. Once a majestic and sprawling estate, it had become neglected and now stood as a lackluster testament to its former glory. In just 1 year of their marriage, Jenny had grown to despise living in that mansion. Night after night, she could hear the sound of movement and scratching within the walls. With each passing night, the writhing sound of gnawing grew more intense, evolving from a single grinding sound against the wooden walls to the sound of dozens of nails clawing at the structure. It had to be rats, she told herself, as shivers ran down her spine at the mere thought. Edward dismissed the notion as just her overactive imagination playing tricks and refused to spend the costs to hire any exterminators. Most of his days were spent in business meetings, and at night he preferred not to be disturbed. A heavy sleeper, he often boasted about being able to sleep through an earthquake. Unfortunately for Jenny, such was not the case when it came to her sleep. At night, like clockwork, Jenny could always hear the scurrying and clawing within the walls, just off in the distance. Every night it worsened until she had enough and decided that she needed a way out, by any means. She refused to be a victim and settle for half of his estate. In her mind, she had earned it all. Edward's body lay twisted and mangled at the bottom of the staircase, his face frozen in an agonizing stare. It was New Year's Eve, and Edward had sent all of the mansion's housekeeping staff away for the night, presenting Jenny with the perfect opportunity. She made her way upstairs, rehearsing the events in her head, playing it out just as she had planned. She would make a frantic emergency call, sobbing that her husband had taken one too many drinks. Being a light drinker, it wouldn't take much for him to become inebriated and clumsy. He had gotten careless, tripped, and fallen. She arrived at the wine cellar and found him there at the bottom, a victim of his own misadventure. With a deep breath, she dialed 911 and started to sob, rehearsing exactly what she was going to tell the operator. Just as she was about to place the call, Jenny's heart suddenly stopped as she desperately clutched her chest, searching for her necklace that she always wore. The small opal necklace was a family heirloom that had been passed down through the generations. It was the one materialistic piece of importance that she valued above all else. Her mind raced, retracing every murderous step until the realization dawned on her that she knew where it was. Somehow, Edward must have grabbed it in a dire attempt to hold on when she pushed him down those dreaded stairs. Even in death, he remained the bane of her existence, she thought. She had to get the necklace back. After all, having it broken off and clenched in Edward's death grip would raise too much unwanted suspicion. Jenny darted back to the wine cellar steps, coming to a shocking halt upon reaching them. At the cusp of the long and narrow stairs, she peered down, appalled at the sight. Edward's jumbled mess of a body was no longer there. She ran down the staircase and noticed a trail of smeared blood stretched across the floor. There's no way that he could have survived, Jenny thought as she followed the crimson trail, her heart racing with wild anticipation. The air was heavy with a musky stench that invaded the senses the moment it was breathed in. At the end of the wine cellar, the trail came to a horrifying end as Jenny stared at Edward's body, covered in hundreds of rats. The rats had gnawed and dragged his mangled body across the floor, halfway into a large hole in the wall. They swarmed over his prone body, tearing through flesh with an insatiable hunger, their bodies intertwined, forming a grotesque blanket of living flesh and fur. She let out a blood-curdling scream as the wave of rodents dragged Edward's body through the wall, deep into the recesses of the mansion. As they dragged him away, she caught a brief glimpse of her opal necklace still locked in Edward's death grip. For a split second, it shimmered like a glowing beacon amongst blood, teeth, and darkness. The horrible image was burned into the darkest corners of her mind. Jenny stood in shock, staring at the large hole in the wall where the horde of rats had retreated to. A wave of fear paralyzed her, drowning out every noise except for the infernal gnawing and scratching that echoed throughout the room. She knew that she had to go after the necklace before it was lost forever in a maze of brick and mortar. If she could recover her necklace, there was still a way to explain to the authorities what had occurred. Determined to succeed with her plan, she took a deep breath before braving the unknown and slowly set foot into the darkened hole. Guided only by her dimly lit phone, Jenny ventured through the labyrinth of narrow walls. Her elegant red dress tore on the side of a wall as she made her way deeper, while warm blood trickled down her leg, attracting the rats to investigate. Their beady eyes reflected a menacing glare in the darkness as they scurried around. The deeper she ventured through the walls, the closer she could see Edward's body being dragged off by the accursed vermin. The stench of blood and death lingered in the air with every passing step she took. A claustrophobic fear swept over her as she inched her way down the linear corridors, leaving her short of breath. The walls started to feel as if they were getting tighter, and the air around grew denser, making it hard to breathe. It was now almost midnight, and this was not how she had envisioned ringing in the new year. It had felt like an eternity, traversing throughout the walls, always just a few feet behind Edward's body. With every labored breath, she grew just a few inches closer. The necklace was in her sights now. Jenny's heart pounded through her chest with anticipation as she forced her way through. She reached out, straining every muscle as her fingertips barely touched the necklace. Her hands desperately clawed to grasp the necklace until she finally felt it firmly in her possession. Just as she clutched the necklace, the flooring beneath her started to break and buckle under the weight. It suddenly collapsed, sending Jenny and Edward's rat-covered corpse barreling through the foundation. A wondrous mess of dust and debris rained down as Jenny came crashing down to the bottom with thunderous force. She lay motionless on the floor for a few minutes before attempting to get up. She could feel the rats scurrying around while she fumbled around in the dark, frantically searching for her phone. The sensation of warm blood rushed down her leg as she slowly stood up, shaken and bruised. The faint light from her phone flickered in the pitch black as she waved it around in a desperate attempt to illuminate the room. The large basement had been tucked away from the rest of the mansion for decades, it seemed. It lay in ruins, covered in cobwebs and thick layers of dust. Jenny couldn't believe her eyes as she shone the light on hundreds of gold coins strewn about the floor. A vast collection of gold statues, jewel-encrusted heirlooms, and other expensive valuables were amassed throughout the room. A fortune of expensive treasure gleamed like a hopeful beacon of light in an ocean of darkness. Jenny had always known the Whalen family to hoard their fortune, but she never imagined it to be this extreme. An intense feeling of euphoria swept over Jenny like a whirlwind of intoxicating bliss. She started to laugh uncontrollably in the wake of the horror she had experienced upon realizing that all of this fortune was hers. Amidst the rubble of chaos and darkness, a sudden alarm cut through the air like a blade. Jenny's phone began to frantically ring and flash with a notification announcing the arrival of the new year. Startled, she stared at the cracked screen, which lit up in a vibrant display of fireworks and confetti emojis. It was midnight, and the only thing the new year heralded in was the masses of rats that poured out of the darkness, attracted to the sound like moths to a flame. A sea of matted fur and sickled teeth descended upon Jenny like an ocean teeming with ravenous hunger. From out of the darkest corners, the rats streamed in, converging on her. Jenny let out a terrifying scream like a banshee that resonated throughout the basement and reverberated up the walls of the old mansion. The blood from her cuts and gashes propelled the beasts into an uncontrollable frenzy. The droves of rats tore and ripped through her supple flesh with agonizing precision. She frantically tried to fight them off, lashing out to no avail. Their numbers were overpowering. Jenny reached out into the darkness, desperately trying to crawl away. She clutched a handful of gold coins as the relentless onslaught of rats, gnawing and feeding, continued. The vast fortune she had envisioned and coveted was now gripped in blood-soaked hands and drowned out by the perpetual darkness. Her anguished screams went unanswered, forever lost within the ill-fated walls. Subscribe to my channel and don't forget to turn on notifications to see you in the next story.